I am now pleased to present our presenter for this morning, Carolyn Kastner. Carolyn is curator emerita of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, where her research, publications, and curatorial projects were focused on the diversity of American modernism. During her tenure at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, she organized many exhibitions, including Jaune Quick-to-See Smith, an American Modernist, Miguel Covarrubias drawing a Cosmopolitan Line, and Georgia O'Keeffe's Watercolors 1916 to 1918. Most recently, she curated an exhibition entitled Gesture, the Figure After Abstraction, for the Manetti Shrem Museum in Davis, California. She is currently working on an essay, The Practice of Seeing Abstractly, to be published in a book focused on Georgia O'Keeffe's years at the University of Virginia. Prior to her move to Santa Fe, Kastner lived in San Francisco, where she was an independent curator and taught art history at the California College of Arts. She earned her Ph.D. in American art history at Stanford University. Please welcome Carolyn.
Good morning. I see the light now. And I hope that I'm on and you can hear me speaking. What a strange time we're living in. Thank you, Shannon. It's wonderful to be here. And I want to thank you also for all the wonderful experiences I've had since last March, being here in my home in Santa Fe, as I am today, transmitting back to all of you. And it was in that spirit that I offered to do this presentation today. So welcome to my home. And I want to share with you today the experience that I've had over time looking at Georgia O'Keeffe's two houses in New Mexico. When I arrived at the museum in 2009, I was immediately asked to join a project publishing a book that was edited by Barbara Buehler-Lines and Agapita Judy Lopez, Georgia O'Keeffe and Her Houses, published in 2012. And if you don't have the book and you're here this morning, you definitely need that book. It's a beautiful book. So as picture editor, it was my job to simply find the photographs that would illustrate O'Keeffe's life in her houses. And the O'Keeffe Museum owns over 1,000 photographs of various subjects, but the majority of them are Georgia O'Keeffe, and of those, Georgia O'Keeffe in her home is a major topic. So out of all of that, I selected 250 illustrations in collaboration. Okay, there we go. In collaboration with Peta and Barbara as we worked to put the book together. She was one of the most photographed women of the 20th century, and first in New York, and photographers followed her to New Mexico when she moved west. Studying hundreds of these images, I was tasked with reducing this down to 250, which sounds like a lot, but I looked at more than 3 times that many photographs over a year putting the book together. But what emerged for me was not an academic exercise. It was much more personal to me, and it gave me a very personal view of O'Keeffe. It touched me deeply. The pictures expressed O'Keeffe's will and persistence as she extended her art practice. And she works to refine, and she brought that refinement to the structure and the function and the aesthetic of her houses, not just her palette and her canvas.
Carolyn?
So, yes.
Sorry, remember to share your screen.
It is shared. Okay. Sorry, are you not seeing me change pictures?
No.
Okay. Let me try that. I see the camera is on. Okay, Let's
There
try
we
this.
go.
Yes?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So these are the photographs of these famous photographers that followed O'Keeffe to New Mexico. And this is where we are now. So you just lost one picture along the way there. So when O'Keeffe came to New Mexico, she purchased two houses, but they're very different houses. And here on the left, Ghost Ranch, it takes a minute, but look, there where the foreground meets the cliffs, you can see her house there. And in these two different houses, you have this sense of the expanse of one on Ghost Ranch and the enclosure of the other. And that's something to think about as we move through these images of the houses. And it's in this work, looking at both of these houses and how they influenced each other, that I have come to respect both houses as two of her greatest works of creative activity. So her houses are an expression of O'Keeffe's connection to the land that she discovered on her first extended stay in New Mexico in the summer of 1929. And I put all of these up because I could see you're coming in from all over the world. And if you haven't visited yet, I wanted you to understand what this landscape is like. So in the upper left is Taos Mountain. So in the first summer she came, she stayed with Mabel Dodge Lujan, where this mountain was visible from the property. That experience changed her personal and her professional life. And the biggest aspect of that is that she continued to return to New Mexico in the following decades. So in 1931, during her third stay in New Mexico, excuse me, Georgia O'Keeffe experienced a new landscape when she stayed with her friend Maria Garland, who owned a ranch on the Rio Grande River, and that's in the upper right corner there. And that's in Alcalde, about an hour southwest of Taos. And I scanned that picture off the internet, and someone loves her art as much as all of us do, because that's a pretty fair and accurate framing of Out Back at Marie's, a painting that O'Keeffe made in 1931. So there's a kind of excitement that comes with all of this. And my mentor and art historian, Wanda Korn, calls that secular ecstasy. And it's this connection that American painters have to the land of this country. When I got to New Mexico, that was mine, she said. As soon as I saw it, that was my country. I'd never seen anything like it before, but it fitted to me exactly. And Georgia O'Keeffe never wavered from that. In fact, that specific quote, which comes in many variations, was spoken in 1977. So she continued to have this immense attachment to the land. Over the next 20 years after her first visit, she spent part of most years living and painting in the high desert of northern New Mexico during the summer months. Until 1949, when she made it her permanent home 3 years after the death of her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, who never visited New Mexico. But that may be a shame for him, but we got the letters that they wrote back and forth. So there's a good outcome from that. In 1934, she discovered the Ghost Ranch, and that's the remaining photographs that you see on your screen there. A dude ranch located on 21,000 acres of spectacular desert landscape of eroded hills and rocky mesas. She immediately rented a guest room and made plans to return the next year, which set a new pattern for her annual visits. And that was that from then on, she only returned to the Ghost Ranch. In 1936, she stayed in an adobe house on the Ghost Ranch built by Arthur Pack, who owned and operated the Dude Ranch. She enjoyed the distance from the guest rooms, and the house was on a road. And if you visit, and you should, you will see that most of the paintings that she made at Ghost Ranch are made within walking distance of the house. So it put her in the midst of this landscape instead of off to the side of that landscape. What's interesting about this, and what changed one of my perceptions of O'Keeffe in this process, is she didn't stay in that house, period. She stayed in that house with ranch hands who also were staying in the rooms of the house as workers on the ranch. So O'Keeffe, for 2 summers, shared that house with other people employed by Arthur Pack. And Leslie Pauline Kemp's book, Ghost Ranch, shares some of the sweetest memories of the people who shared the house with her. So these are some of the interesting things that start to invade my thoughts, is how she's not the icon that we understand her to be. She's not remote. She doesn't live remotely. So the titles of these paintings also touch me. My Front Yard, My Backyard, The House I Live In. This is a woman who has come to find this place and finds it as a place to live, not just to work, but to live. So before she ever owned the house, she began in 1937, the year she made this painting, to adapt her needs, adapt the house to her needs. And this window, which right away you can see looks like none of the others, was enlarged that year by Georgia O'Keeffe, because that's the room that she used for her studio. In 1940, after staying in the house for 4 years, she bought it and 7 acres of surrounding land. She no longer shared the house with the ranch employees. It was the first house she had ever owned and emblematic of her growing commitment to build the life she desired here in New Mexico. O'Keeffe bought her Abiquiu house in 1945. She owned both of them until the end of her life. Her homes were supportive and inspirational to her artwork. The Georgia O'Keeffe Museum owns both properties. They received the Ghost Ranch as a gift from the Burnett Foundation in 2005, and in 2006, they received the Abiquiu house from the Georgia O'Keeffe Foundation. So I'm going to begin with Ghost Ranch, and then we'll continue to look at the changes she made in her studio and in her art practice as it relates to these specific properties. When O'Keeffe got to New Mexico and to Ghost Ranch, these blazing colors and crisp contours were immediately attractive to her. They were just irresistible. Describing the views from Ghost Ranch in 1939, she explained to her friend Henry McBride, all the earth colors of the painter's palette are out there in the many miles of the Badlands. The light Naples yellow through the ochres, orange and red and purple earth, even the soft green earths. So this is where we're going to get technical. So you may need to move your pictures around so you can see everything here, but what we're looking at here is the view from the house out to the Paternelle. And on the right is a plan made by architect Beverly Spears in 2010 to try to reimagine how did Georgia O'Keeffe find the house when she moved into it, because she had altered it so much that it really wasn't clear any longer what the original house is. We do have original pictures and she used those, but also careful investigation of the foundation, the floors, and the ceilings of the house to make this plan. So with her artistic practice, O'Keeffe was deliberate in planning and precise, and as with her artistic practice, she was as deliberate and precise as planning her houses as she was in creating her art. So in building from what was there, she adapted these 2 adobe homes over time, built both of them from indigenous materials in a vernacular style in New Mexico. Yet she finished both with modernist ideas and sensitive to her artistic practice. The personal choices she made in the architectural program of both houses show her commitment first to her art practice and to modernism. From photographs and close inspection of the property, we came to understand how she used the house. So going back to the plan for a minute, I'm sorry, I always wake up with this frog in my throat. Going back to this plan, I want to point out the Paternelle is here. So the plan is flipped from how we're seeing. The portal, which is here, is right here. So from the house, you're surrounded by 2 wings. And if you're sitting here, you look out to the Paternelle here, 12 miles away. So Another thing that you need to understand about the construction, ranchos houses are informal and they open out onto patios. There aren't interior hallways. So this is important in understanding this view and O'Keeffe's attachment to the view. Though the Cerrillo Pedernal was just 12 miles from her home, the view was personal to her and became a frequent subject of her art, as most of you probably know. But it was the structure of the house that enforces this in some way. And without the living room, because she had taken over the living space as her studio from the very beginning, from the first time she stayed there, that's where she was painting and working. She was on the patio very often, particularly during the summer months when she was there most often. But it's also something about the changeability. And for even those of us who work at the museum and have spent time there, it's astonishing. So on the website, there is a video of time lapse of a single day by Ben Finberg, who captured what it is. And to understand it, you really need to watch that film, because even having stayed there and watched throughout the day, it's amazing, because in the time lapse, in one day in March, you see clear skies like this, gathering clouds, the Pedernal is erased, rain falls, snow comes, snow covers the patio, it warms, it clears, water runs from the melting snow off of the canale and water runs down through the middle of the film. So think about that as an artist. So she's living there. It's not just that she gets up and looks at a view. This is not how people want it to be, an eternal view. This is an ever-changing view. And that's what she brings to the her art practice. And that's the power of her house to influence that view. So here she is on the patio. Because the studio inhabited the largest interior space in the house and what had been the living room, her social life was carried out outside. And that is something that also influenced other people who were there to see it, curators and artists and other friends and family members who visited regularly. This is the gift to us. In front of my house, she said, there are low scrub bushes and cottonwood trees, and further out, a line of hills. And then I have this mountain, a flat top mountain that slopes off on each side, a blue mountain. She created 24 of these paintings that I know about. And I remember one journalist wanted me to talk about her obsession, but as you'll see, just in my presentation today, there are 3 other sequence of paintings that run to the number of 24. So it's that aspect, that color and the shape of the mountain, that aspect dominates these canvases, which gives us as viewers the sense that we know this place, we identify this place, and it catches your breath. I never stopped watching for the Pedernal every time I rode up to her Abiquiu or Ghost Ranch house. So the north side wasn't quite so easy. So this is the view of the north side of the house. And if we're standing in this way, the red cliffs are behind us. And that's what she wanted to see. That's what she wanted to get to. She had enlarged the window in 1937 to bring more light into the studio space. And she writes about that to her friend, Eddie Stettheimer. I am here and I like it. Put in a big window so it's very light. And I don't have a further record. I don't know if we'll ever find that. But the power of that is she didn't own the house, and we don't know if she asked permission or just hired people to come in and enlarge that window. And she continued to reconfigure the architectural program after she purchased the house in 1940, adding a picture window there in the middle. And I have tried to draw these out because this one in particular we'll look at very carefully. It looks much more difficult. Here, it's an enlargement at the margins. Here is the removal of a great amount of self-supporting adobe between these windows. And this becomes the width of the picture window here. And then eventually she continues to enlarge the windows in this room, which she took as her bedroom. So to look from the inside, we have some wonderful pictures from 1933 as Arthur Pack and his family lived in this house. So we understand how a middle-class family would go about living in this house. But what we see immediately is Elliot Porter's photograph shows us how she began to enlarge those windows almost immediately. And we continue to talk about that. We talk about her refinements and how much adobe she removes for windows, but very seldom do we talk about how she also closed windows. And so here in this lower image from 1967, we know that in 1946, she asked an assistant to board up the windows opposite this window. This is the opposite corner of her studio. And later in the 60s, she boarded up a door that's behind this wall. So this enclosure of this space, the orientation of the easel perpendicular to the north window in the northeast corner of her studio is something that she was perfecting in a house that already stood there. And that is the way she built her studio in Abiquiu eventually. So after living in the house for 2 decades and 10 years after she installed a picture window in the Abiquiu house, she went about installing a picture window here at the Ghost Ranch house. Now, we've talked about this before, but here are these two in comparison. So this already is so daunting, I couldn't even imagine hiring a contractor to come and do that. But what's more dramatic than that is when we go inside to look at what she needed to do. So here, we'll start here. Here is then the location of the picture window as it's framed. And I'm sorry, I don't have really a long expanse of that wall to show you the breadth of it. But this is one window. When we're looking at the house, this is the window on the left. There was another window on the other side of this wall, and the adobe between was taken down. So it wasn't just a case of taking down the north wall. And back to this picture, she asked someone to remove the interior perpendicular wall, again, a supporting adobe wall, and she asked for it to be removed all the way to the ceiling from the floor. Now, I don't have records about this, but we do have this photograph by Todd Webb, and that's his wife, Lucille, sitting in the picture window at Ghost Ranch in 1957. So this is the earliest time that we know the picture window was in place. So I want to go back to the plan now, just to keep up with all of this and to try for you to visualize this, because even for me, I kept having to go back as we were putting the book together to really think this through. So in 37, she enlarges this window. Remember, again, this is the plan, how she found the house. This is the house the Packs lived in. And then in this corner, the next thing she did was to wall up this window, which would have caused a reflection from the south, which is a raking light in the afternoon, and then closed up this door, the door to the kitchen. Then this is that dramatic move where she not only removes this portion of the wall down below the window, but also takes out a section of this wall. And finally, she moves from her studio. This is all to perfect the light and her view in the studio. She moves to make her bedroom a room that she took over that Spear's best guess is that it was a storage space, that she takes over this room. Now, she had been sleeping there, and she talks about the inconvenience. It only had an outside door with no access to any other room in the house. So, in perfecting this place, she writes to Stieglitz in 1941, "I had a man knock down a wall between the room where I work and the room where I sleep." So it's this small room that she continues now to imagine changing this whole north wing of the house in order to be her private space for sleeping and working. And so eventually she takes out this corner adobe as well. And as you saw in the contemporary picture, extending the window to here and extending the window to here. So she has a very modern corner of glass. But there's more to this story, and that has to do with, again, the misperception that she's alone. She had an assistant and someone who helped to manage her life at the ranch, Maria Chabot, who stayed with her summers during this period. And she had family and visitors. There are pictures of Maurice Grosser, who came back 2 different summers and stayed for extended periods of time. So privacy in her studio was another goal that's going on here, and that's something to keep track of as well. So in 1968, Edith Evans Asbury was interviewed for the New York Times, and it's the most explicit quote I could ever find. And she says, "Miss O'Keeffe's studios are forbidden territory. A guest who intrudes there is never asked to be a guest again." And in other correspondence, I've found suggestions around that. Phrases like, "I won't make that mistake again," things like that. So with so many visitors and even family members to come to the Abiquiu house and to the Ghost Ranch house, privacy was one of the issues. So this is the glorious view from the bedroom. So when she wakes up in the morning with her head on this pillow, she's looking straight out. Sorry, I don't have that view. This is taken from just outside the window. This is the view that she sees from her bedroom. And you recognize that in many of these paintings of the yellow cliffs. So she now had this bedroom with the windows extended and the exterior door. Both express her personal connection to the land. It falls into her art, but there's also this power about her desire to be on the land. And the outside door was an important habit that she had of rising, supported an important habit she had of rising before dawn and walking out onto the land. And in this space, light is glorious. And I've stayed only one night just to understand how she thought about this, but it's not sunrise, it's how the light changes everywhere. And you just keep looking, and the more light that comes, the colors change instantly all around you. So she did this at the Ghost Ranch house, and that was part of the draw of this bedroom. She could rise and be immediately on the land. And that's reported in many letters to many people, but especially to Stieglitz. So she describes that. At the back door are the red hills and the cliffs and the sands, the Badlands. I go out my back door and walk for 15 minutes, and I'm somewhere that I've never been before, where it seems that no one has ever been before me. And I can hear that in a colonial voice now, but still at this late time in the 21st century, this expanse of land who's been in private ownership for a century is extraordinary in its emptiness. And you feel that, the sound, the silence of it all. It's an extraordinary place. So this is the gift back to us. O'Keeffe's extended stay in the Ghost Ranch transformed her connection not only to the high desert landscape, but also to her artistic practice. In 1935, during her second summer in her staying at the Ghost Ranch, she fulfilled her quest for an identifiable American modernism, and she called what she called the great American thing. Grounded in a specific sense of place, her paintings of bones, which began in 1931, now hovered over the identifiable Ghost Ranch landscape. So if you go out to the Ghost Ranch, you can find the profile of that set of hills from 1935. And in her monograph from 1976, reflecting on the slow synthesis of joining those two genres of desert landscape and still life, O'Keeffe observed, I had looked out on the hills for weeks and painted them again and again. I had painted those hills from the car in bright sunlight and had failed dismally, but I could see them further away from my window in the rain. So I tried again. They seemed right with the ram's head. I don't remember where I picked up the head or the hollyhock. My paintings sometimes grow piece by piece from what is around. So my point in elaborating this is this extended stay and the return brought such familiarity and persistence in finding those colors, in identifying that landscape across her canvas, that it literally changed everything about how she was framing her sensibility of American modernism. So the Ghost Ranch was a place of artistic inspiration, joy, and retreat. It was her favorite place to relax and walk, even after she had painted the last landscape. But as much as O'Keeffe loved the Ghost Ranch, the remote seasonal retreat was not habitable year-round. So in 1945, she purchased a second adobe home that dates to the 18th century in the village of Abiquiu, when 16,000 acres were granted to a diverse community of 34 families by the Spanish colonial governor Tomás Valdés Capuchin in 1754, a communal land grant that continues to this day. So thanks to Google, we can see it. Here's her house, and the property goes right along here and over here. The wall around the house is not visible because there are so many trees. Here's the house. Here's her studio. This is an immense drop off. This might be more romantic. This is how people want to see that house, as if it's away, far. But in fact, she has neighbors just across the road here, and around the corner, Santo Tommaso Church, which is on a patio, and it's a civic space where the library sits. And so O'Keeffe is on a mesa, but in a village. And that's very important to thinking and rethinking how she lives her life. So unlike the Ghost Ranch, the Abiquiu house surrounds an interior patio that sits on this 4-acre site high above the Rio Chama and across the road from the neighbors, as I pointed out. So this is an important point to talk about Alicia Guzman and her 2017 book, Georgia O'Keeffe at Home. It's a great contribution to the literature because Alicia is a New Mexico native and was born in another land grant community, Truchas, and she expands the social and cultural history of the places Georgia O'Keeffe lived and painted by describing the importance of those sites to indigenous and Hispano inhabitants. And that's what I want to bring here, is how O'Keeffe found a place and created a space for herself in a Hispanic village in New Mexico. When O'Keeffe bought the abandoned house from the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, the adobe was melting into the earth, but she welcomed the opportunity to make it her own, suited to her art and her life. The Abiquiu house had two essentials of living year-round: a well for domestic water and an acequia that fed the garden and orchard. And she created a garden so big that she could, in fact, feed herself and visitors for most of each year. But this was not a renovation project like with the Pack House. This was a house and a studio that rose from the ground up, planned by Georgia O'Keeffe and managed by Maria Chabot. And she writes about this profoundly, again, with wonder. When I first saw the Abiquiu house, it was a ruin with an adobe wall around the garden, broken in a couple of places by fallen trees. As I climbed and walked about in the ruin, I found a patio. It was a good-sized patio with a long wall with a door on it. That wall with a door in it was something I had to have. It took me 10 years to get it, 3 more years to fix the house so I could live in it. And after that, the wall with a door in it was painted many times. So O'Keeffe created this photo on the lower left and printed it as a postcard. And she sent that out as a kind of announcement of taking inhabiting her new house in Abiquiu. So she sent that postcard with some version of the quote that I just read to you to many people. So there's that. And then on the lower right, this is the formal entrance. If you're a visitor, formally, this is how you enter into the patio and into the sitting room here. And this is the door in the wall. and this is the door in the wall. So this explains the fascination here. So when we look at this set of paintings, what comes to mind again is exactly this idea of what happens as this view in the patio. When you move across a patio from room to room, you see a different perspective. At different times of day, you see different shadows that fall here and here. It's no mistake that that photograph that she sent out had a beautiful shadow hitting just the corner of that door. In 1949, the year O'Keeffe moved to Abiquiu permanently, that wall with a door in it that she had to have was the subject of 4 paintings. Like the Pedernal at Ghost Ranch, it was always in her sightline and on her mind as she moved between the rooms. And in the first decade she lived in the house, she created 18 paintings of the door. All right, so here we have some historic plans and again, architect Beverly Spears' drawing of the house. So on the left, you have a map that was drawn by Maria Chabot, and I'll explain more about that relationship in a moment. But she was assisting O'Keeffe and in Abiquiu while O'Keeffe was primarily in New York. So this is the first map that she drew up, and this was in a letter dated March 10th, 1946. I love it because it shows the garden, which was so important to both of them. And Maria Chabot had experience planning gardens for other people. And this is the house as Chabot draws it, as she found it. It's not to scale, but it gives you a sense of these traditional houses that are built one adobe room at a time. You can add on in any direction and keep going. And the oldest part of this house that dates back to the 18th century is back in this quadrant right here. And also here is that buggy house and the studio that becomes O'Keeffe's studio. That's so important. Here, the formal entrance we just looked at, that door she had to have, and the patio, which opens out onto several rooms, as you can see here. The one change she prescribed was the sitting room, something that O'Keeffe didn't have at the Ghost Ranch, an interior social space, and knocking down a wall between 2 small rooms to make a larger one. Beverly Spears' plan is how you find the house today, and it's flipped from this one. So just to orient you again, the cliff is out here, neighbors are over here. This is the studio as it sits today. This is the patio, the formal entrance, and the sitting room, okay? So in getting oriented in this way, I want to tell you that O'Keeffe engaged Maria Chabot to manage the building project at Abiquiu. She had assisted the artist's daily life at the Ghost Ranch, and she was familiar with personal and artistic needs and the changes that O'Keeffe had made to the house to accommodate her art practice. She had participating in walling up some spaces and hiring people to open spaces. So with that knowledge, Chabot created the map and sent it to O'Keeffe, describing how she might live and work in that house. Chabot imagined new uses for the existing rooms, and that's what her map includes here. And with the 2 plans, we can understand something about how this idea manifests itself into the beautiful compound that you will now visit. And if you haven't, you will want to now for sure. So that went out March of 46. In July of 1946, Alfred Stieglitz died, and O'Keeffe spent most of the next 3 years settling his estate in New York, while Chabot managed the project for her. So we have as a gift here this great archive of Maria Chabot's letters and her pictures of building the house, which are also on the museum's website. So those letters record their decisions, sometimes deliberations, while rebuilding the house. Surrounded by a wall and inward looking to the patio, the only possibility for gaining a view of the surrounding landscape was beyond this compound. Now, the studio here is the immediate idea that Chabot had. And while it looks like it's part of the house, these are walls. These are just walls around on the property. But this is the house. So this is the perimeter of the house. So from the house and the domestic spaces, you cross a plaza here to get to the studio. As Chabot planned her home for O'Keeffe, she imagined the studio in a separate building at the edge of the mesa that had previously functioned as a stable and buggy house. It was a foundation that could support the largest interior space on the property and offer the only view out to the Chama River Valley and to the Jemez Mountains beyond. So, opening up this wall to the view. But it's very interesting because later in March in 1946, Chabot writes to O'Keeffe, "I'm not discouraged about your studio. They're in the midst of discussions about different ideas. The logical thing is the plate glass out there on the cliff edge, Georgia. None of the other rooms matter. They will all close you in, but the studio is going to let you out." And when I read that quote, it just so fits the feeling, because you walk in on this side through one door. The rest of that wall is, there are no windows on that wall, just that door. And you immediately go out into that landscape. Your vision can't resist it. So that window was an extravagant luxury in rural New Mexico. Yet in the same letter, she writes to O'Keeffe, "Do you want your little corner bedroom mostly glass?" So she's now imagining rebuilding the relationship of bedroom to studio in the Abiquiu space of, as she's planning. It took a couple of weeks, but O'Keeffe wrote back. After hesitating about the cliffs and the cost of the glass, she finally agreed to Chabot's vision. The 16-foot window was installed in 1947, a decade before the Ghost Ranch picture window. Also in 1947, O'Keeffe asked for skylights to be installed. Chabot eventually installed 4 of them. So while we're looking at this picture, take a look now at what she's done here. Enlarging the window in this north wall, setting the easel perpendicular to that light with no light coming in from the south. And here, one more detail. This is the door to her dressing room, bathroom, and her bedroom. I'm just looking at my notes because I forget things. I get excited. There. So Chabot's work to open the studio wall rewarded O'Keeffe with a spectacular view of the ever-changing color of the trees in the valley before, a place she had painted even before she bought the house. And that's how she came to know about the house, because she had been painting in this valley. During the 1950s, the overlook from her studio inspired more than 24 paintings. And again, these aren't as famous. O'Keeffe owns most of them. But this again shows what this contact and constant viewing does to her art practice. It sparks her imagination. She creates drawings and paintings, and that extends over more than a decade in her life, like the other sites that are more famous. But here, looking at the cottonwood trees that grew along the Rio Chama, the titles of the painting also tell us something about her migration. There's not a single painting made in the summer because she's at the Ghost Ranch during that time. So they're titled like this one, after the seasons: spring, winter, and the fall paintings that she created on that site. So another inspiration came to her unexpectedly, and that's the view from the corner bedroom that inspired her imagination, as she writes. "I have 2 walls of my room in the Abiquiu house in glass, and from one window, I see the road toward Espanola, Santa Fe, and the world." So like her Ghost Ranch house, her bed is oriented to look out here to the east, and this is the vision from both windows. East is in this direction, and there is a door here. So she has that door again to walk out on the land just first thing in the morning from her bedroom. This became an influence on her practice as well. In 1952, she began to visualize that winding road toward Espanola in a sequence of ever more simplified composition. The last one from 1963, The Winter Road, was inspired by her own photography. She was very interested. This is the looking east, and the sun would come up from this direction. And she describes taking a picture and radically turning the camera, and suddenly she saw the road stand up, which inspired this painting. It amused me, and I began drawing and painting it as a new shape. The trees and mesa beside it were unimportant for that painting. It was just the road. And this is what I call seeing abstractly. In a moment, she could see a painting, a flat two-dimensional surface inscribed with a calligraphic mark. So now, going to something she didn't have in the Ghost Ranch house. But like her home at the Ghost Ranch, some of the architectural refinements continued years after she'd been living in the house. So not everything happened in that first building of the house. As she began to work fewer hours in her studio during the 1960s, she enlarged the window of her sitting room in 1964. And by opening the entire south wall, which frames a view to a tamarisk tree and brings natural light inside, she changed the dynamic of that room. Georgia O'Keeffe's house demonstrates the extraordinary will and creativity of a woman who constructed the life she imagined. My research into how O'Keeffe lived and worked in her houses reveals her commitment to her art and how she extended that to her modern aesthetic in every aspect of how she lived, especially in building and renovating these houses. Now I'm going to have to close the blind. The sun just came in here. Sorry, that didn't happen yesterday when I practiced. She planned her houses to fit her aesthetics and finished the public spaces with modern furniture. I can't live my life any other way, she said in an interview. My house in Abiquiu is pretty empty. Only what I need is in it. So looking into these spaces, we can also see something very dramatic about her aesthetic and how modern it is in a traditional adobe home in a small village in northern New Mexico. So it also gives us an opportunity, and I've tracked her paintings around her house from her studio. She often took her most recent paintings and put them up on the wall in her studio, but also her dining room, which is just in the door beyond here, and also here in her living room. Great big nails driven into the wall where she would hang these paintings. So this is part of her life as well, living with her art afterwards. And this gives us an opportunity specifically for me to reflect on the idea of how her art practice is extended into the building of this house. Because these two paintings come from a direct experience of being in an airplane high above the landscape, and then coming home to translate those into refined abstract paintings. And it's similar to how she approached her house. They are simplified and refined by experience, exactly as she approaches her house, simplifying and refining. O'Keeffe refined the vernacular forms of her New Mexico homes from her experience and with a modern aesthetic. Her artistic practice of reduction and simplification extends to the way she designs her homes and simplifies their interiors. And to this day, they remain utterly modern. But I want to close by talking about something else I found that also is profound. Famous photographers had traveled to New Mexico to photograph O'Keeffe and her home, so we can see lots of those. But also two of her friends, Maria Chabot and Todd Webb, provide candid views and a record of Georgia O'Keeffe's life. All of these photographs leave a record of how O'Keeffe's houses were designed and built, how she worked in her studio, but specifically from Chabot and Webb and others. These photographs also visualize her homes as sites of joy. Who knew she had dimples until you find these pictures, right? She entertained, she cooked for her friends and family until late in her life. And I especially suggest seeking out Todd Webb's photographs, which are on the museum's website. They're extraordinary in the breadth of the life that they show. And just to close with that, over time, that door in the patio that inspired the purchase of her Abiquiu house and 24 paintings also became a site of friendly pleasures and memories. And here she is in 1956 playing with Todd Webb. And one of the pictures is used often. And when I found him in the same pose, in the same door, I just framed it immediately to put these two together. They're pendants. They're two friends, two artists, imagining an afternoon of joy and also sitting in the patio, having a good time. It's probably Lucille Webb, Todd Webb's wife, who took that picture. So I hope you've enjoyed my journey through these houses and photographs. And I want to extend my thanks to PETA and to all of the artists and the staff members and the art historians and curators who toured through this house with me to discover and ask the questions that brought about the knowledge that I've shared with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
So we have a couple questions from our audience, and please keep sending us questions. You know, we won't be able to get to all of them today, but we have other mechanisms for answering them. So please share your questions and your thoughts, and we will try to answer them in some form in the future. So one of our first questions was, because O'Keeffe did so much remodeling, did O'Keeffe have any learned skills as an architect? Or were the changes she made to the house purely from her artistic senses?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. That's a whole page I cut out, but she doesn't have that training. And as a former professor in an art school, I always found my architectural students having profound sense of three-dimensional art. And I mentioned that one time, that they saw 3 dimensions. And one of my students said to me, I think it's weird that you only see in 2 dimensions. And it's that astounds me about her envisioning this, to walk into a very traditional home and imagine how she can change that. She hadn't done that kind of work in any other place she lived. And so she didn't have that training. But what I'm trying to convey is the parallel of approaching those architectural changes was precisely the way I know her painting practice to be. That is, after careful observation and knowing something really well, then she moves to make a mark on paper, to make a drawing, and then to add color and make a composition. And that's, I think, how she primarily did this. That first move must have liberated her too. I hope someday we find a letter where Pax says, absolutely not, you can't refine that house with a bigger window, and she did it anyway. I would love to know that. I don't know what that was, but that was so natural to her to bring more light in. And the others came more slowly with refinement. So I think she must have learned something along the way. And keep in mind, and Dale's presentation in May tells some of that story, this wasn't a place where there were codes and you applied for permits. I hired a man, he knocked down a wall. Oh my God, right? Mm-hmm. So he had great power, visual skill, but also steely nerves to do this. So I'm so glad you asked that question.
We've had 2 questions because you showed those wonderful pictures of her entertaining friends from both the village and elsewhere. One question was, did Alexander Calder ever visit her in Abiquiu or Ghost Ranch? I couldn't recall. And then someone else asked, who were some of the people who visited her?
Oh yeah, oh, it's fun. And you know, there's another part to that too, because famous people love to say they arrived at the ranch and she wouldn't let them in. And, you know, when you look at that house and the road is right there and the gate, one of the reasons she loved the Ghost Ranch is that people would come to that gate and yell to her, O'Keeffe, come out. And Pita Lopez described that experience. It was horrifying to me. So this is, to be in that inner sanctum, to be inside is extraordinary, because it's to be in a familial position in that house. And there are great stories by everybody that was there. So her family and her friends. Todd Webb visited often. They met through Stieglitz. He was a mentor to Todd Webb, and bonded when he photographed her exhibition at MoMA. And after Stieglitz's death, he then asked, could he help in any other way? He's 20 or 25 years younger. He comes there, and he's young, and he writes to his wife, oh my God, I'm in this amazing house. So he's one. Agnes Martin, Pita tells me she remembers her coming at least once to the house for lunch. And then there are these famous photographers that I already identified to you. And I've got names here, and I'll just mention them. Philippe Halsman, Cecil Beaton, John Langard, Tony Vaccaro takes those great pictures. He took the picture of the boys in the house in the evening. Tony Vaccaro had just made a meal of spaghetti and then takes the picture. And if you look at that picture, he must have his camera on a tripod, because he's in the picture, but you can see he's just arrived. And it's Vaccaro and Webb both have gifted the copyright to the museum. So those photographs are in the collection and you can find them. And then Balthazar Korab came and did these beautiful architectural images in the house. And some of the other people, Maurice Grosser is the man on the motorcycle. Bernice and Max Martinez are people from the village who visit often, and they're pictured here and in the patio often, and O'Keeffe is holding the baby at different times, and then dinner with Lucille and Todd Webb and being out on the patio with them. And right now, other famous names escape me, but it's something that is part of her life and part of her extension of gratitude and how she entertained people. And this is an important part that people can't imagine. And so as often as I could, and Shannon knows this over the years, I would put these photographs in when we would put in portraits, because I wanted people to know she had friends, she ate dinner, she cooked dinner, right? So, but it's worth looking. She has lots of friends. And if other names come to me, then I'll write them down and mention them earlier or later.
Well, and someone asked, did Frida Kahlo visit her? And we know she visited her at Ghost Ranch. Laura Gilpin is another name mentioned in the chat. She visited her. So yeah, she had a wide circle of friends. Oh, just came up, did Andy Warhol? Yes, Warhol visited her at Ghost Ranch.
Thank you. Yes, the famous story of he signed his signature on the refrigerator, and the housekeeper was appalled, and a week later came and cleaned his signature off of the refrigerator. So it always becomes part of the tour, telling that story. Frida Kahlo, no, but Rosa Covarrubias came. And there are pictures of the two of them in Ghost Ranch. And they, when I was doing the Covarrubias exhibition, we found those. But O'Keeffe traveled to Mexico and saw Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera there, along with the Covarrubiases, but also in New York. So there was a friendship, but I don't know that either Frida Kahlo or Diego Rivera ever came to the house, but they were certainly friends, and she visited them in their homes.
And then we had another question. What was the total cost to renovate the Abiquiu house? And I know you've done a lot of research looking at receipts.
I haven't. And primarily because, and so another piece I cut out, the archive for the houses is split between the Museum Research Center and the Beinecke Library. But for a brief time, Barbara Lines and the archivist Liz and the assistant Yumi Xeroxed as many records as they could before they sent everything off to the Beinecke Library. So really, there's the business records of things are in the Beinecke. And I know, for instance, we had bracketed that picture window in the house between 63 and 65. And Sarah Rovan went to the Beinecke and found a receipt, 1964. So most of the work I've done comes out of those photographs because I've not gone through the business records. But I saw a question go by, how can I contact someone? I'm working on a dissertation. I'll find you, we'll be in touch, because this is part of why I do this. This was a love project. I never got to do the exhibition when Wanda Korn and I were working on Living Modern. The house was originally going to be a part of it. That's another lecture. But what's important about that is that I grew to love this project. I love touring artists and art historians in the houses. I always loved asking PETA questions. So if you go on a tour and PETA's your guide, ask her questions. She knows things. But she's not written a book. She's not written this down. But this is the problem. The business records are in the Beinecke, and we have photographs and we have letters, some of them in the research center. So that's research that continues. And my thought in doing this was to invite people, because this is one of the last areas of going into the letters to look at this correspondence. Because a few are brought out here and there, and I've picked them up and I find them and I would put them away. And then those are the quotes I give you from friends. So yes, there are projects out there, probably more than one dissertation.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. We're a little past 10, so we're going to wrap up. Thank you to everyone for tuning in, and especially thank you to our members and donors, and have a great day.
Oh, I just remembered a name. May we take one more minute?
Sure.
Momaday, the poet. And oh my God, he tells the best story, because he also, like Todd Webb, was younger. So he came to visit. They were friends, and she enjoyed his poetry. He loved her art. And O'Keeffe wanted to give him a cocktail in the afternoon. And so he mentions that, yes, that would be fine. And then she goes away. But her assistant in the kitchen was gone for the day, and the liquor cupboard was locked up. So she goes back into the sitting room and says to him, yes, I can offer you a cocktail, but it'll take me just a minute. Then she goes back into the kitchen and he hears banging. She knocked the hinges off of the cupboard door that was locked to get him a cocktail. Now, that story is part of her generosity. After she had offered him a cocktail, she was going to give him that cocktail. Now, when he tells that story in his great sonorous voice, it's just beautiful, because he's a young man and he can't imagine what's going on in the kitchen. And so he sits patiently, but she delivers the cocktail to him. So that's one of my favorite famous stories. So
that's a great
goodbye and thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you everyone for tuning in.